Welcome, welcome, everybody. Thanks for downloading another episode of Wigs for Wigs. I'm Joe Cook, joined once again by our political panel, the psychologist, Dr. Michael Buxbaum, retired educator, Bill Venezia, and the Judge Edward DeFazio. And we're here to talk about the absolutely nothing that's been going on in the news over the last couple of weeks. Lots of quiet, peace and quiet, Pax Romana time. Everybody's happy. Or maybe that's not so much the case. But we're recording this on February 25th, 2025, if you're not listening along as we do these. So just so you're aware, we're just over a month into Donald Trump's new presidency. A lot has been happening. The war in Ukraine, there's been some new news about trying to bring that to an end. We can discuss that, certainly. I've got my Ukraine lapel pin on today. Everything going on with DOGE, with Elon Musk taking a literal chainsaw, if you saw that bizarre clip, to the federal government, and other stuff that's been going on. Donald Trump's cabinet has largely been confirmed by this point. So there's a lot we could touch on. I kind of want to do maybe 15 to 20 minutes on each of those topics today. So Bill, as our OG, a term that I taught you on our last episode on this podcast, which of those topics would you like to start with?
Well, yesterday, the ignominy of basically the United States voting with the Russians not to condemn them for the war in the Ukraine. Maybe I missed it because with all the news, has Elisa Stefanik been confirmed, or doesn't the
No.
So who cast the vote?
They have an interim ambassador in place, or whatever the term is, but no. And I just read that Mike Johnson does not want the confirmation of Stefanik to proceed because he is that concerned about his margin in the House.
Yeah, that's exactly what I read as well.
Well, I just thought that it was all heading to this when Trump basically, left his meeting with Zelensky and told him, well, you started this war, which basically is, just another in a series of big lies.
They started it. They were there. They existed. So
they existed. They weren't invaded. Their sovereignty wasn't basically.
It's like the places that were people that blame a woman for being raped.
Yeah. It's the best gaslighting of Trump's career, I think. And sadly, I mean, the news with foreign policy, it's what are we going to do? We're going to basically send American troops to fight by their comrades, the North Koreans, in the Ukraine? Because I think the Russians, that was a Freudian slip, calling the Soviets, they're running out of troops. And, that's why the North Koreans are there. It's a sad state of affairs, which has people like my father and I think Eddie's dad, who basically fought against fascism, to basically be associated with this. They're rolling over in their graves.
Both my grandfathers fought in World War II.
So,
I think.
No, I'm done. Go ahead, Mike.
No, but it's a very complicated problem because the people here in America are not really ready to just throw money at Ukraine forever, and they send a lot of opposition in kind of constantly supporting the war of attrition, which is kind of could never end. And I lost the screen.
Yeah, I was just showing.
And,
who actually is representing the U.S. at the UN right now is somebody named Dorothy Camille Shea. She's the interim ambassador to the UN.
So anyway, there is not a lot of appetite for constantly supporting and throwing money at Ukraine. The Europeans are not really playing their part, other than some, but still about 1/3 of the NATO countries are not giving even 2% of their GDP for defense. So I think that's something that needs to change. The Europe does not have significant military manufacturing capability. That's another issue. So I think we do need to work towards a solution. So my feeling is that Trump is trying to be transactional and trying to sort of negotiate some kind of peace. So the question is going to be, under what circumstances? Is he going to just give Putin whatever he wants, or is it just a technique towards achieving, at least a ceasefire, if not peace? So I don't see it quite as negatively, because I think if we just keep on throwing money at Ukraine, this war will never end.
Mike, I think that peace is definitely should be negotiated, but to negotiate it by saying that you're not getting back any of the lands that you lost, and that your minerals reserves are going to be part of this as they're sold to the United States. I understand the transactional piece to that, but I also don't see the consistency in foreign policy when you have the president saying that Gaza should not be, the Palestinians should not be there. They should be in Egypt, they should be in Jordan, and that area should be developed and it should be an American protectorate. But yet he would want to take those resources and send them there. Do you know how many Americans would die there? Do you know how many terrorists have been created because of the war in Gaza? I mean, and then now you're going to basically take those and place them arbitrarily in Egypt and Jordan.
Well, that's nonsensical. I mean, I don't think we even have to seriously entertain that concept that you're going to take millions of people and relocate them. That's just nonsense. I mean, part of dealing with Donald Trump is I think we have to not respond to some of the nonsense.
Well, the proposal of Greenland and Canada becoming part of the United States.
Well, I don't know about Greenland, but Canada's nonsense too. And if Donald Trump thinks Canada's going to be a Republican state in the United States, he's in for an awakening there also. But I like that Canada is literally larger than the United States, and he thinks it would be one state if it joined the U.S.
It's important not to take Donald Trump seriously, because whatever he says, he's just throwing out ideas. Whatever comes to his mind, he's going to say. And then, unfortunately, a lot of people take it seriously and keep running with it and so on and so forth. But I think he's the type of guy who doesn't think. He sort of throws out different ideas and then see what sort of sticks, what doesn't stick. But I don't think there is any danger of us actually taking over Gaza. And also, nobody will take Palestinians. I mean, Egypt is not going to take them because that radicalized population, which is part of Muslim Brotherhood, and that's the least they need. And if Jordan took Palestinians, there would be a civil war there. So the Hashemite dynasty will not survive. So
I wouldn't take it as seriously if he wasn't the president of the United States.
And I want to say just a couple things, and I want to bring the judge in. But number one, as an old conservative, isn't it sad that we can't take what the president of the United States says seriously? I mean, isn't it supposed to be looking up to that position of being one that we honor and respect, and they're supposed to be a model for what Americans are? I thought that's what we used to believe in as conservatives. I mean, I feel like I'm just this, man screaming at the clouds, but I feel like everything that conservatism stood for, at least in messaging, when I was growing up and becoming a conservative, doesn't apply anymore. That's number one. Number two, shame on Marco Rubio. I know I've really been hard on congressional Republicans, but he used to be a hawk on Russia, and now he's just, going along with all this essentially pro-Putin messaging that's coming out of the White House. I never read The Art of the Deal, but I don't think saying you're going to give up all your negotiating chips before even starting negotiations is supposed to be how a negotiation works. And to say that Volodymyr Zelensky is a dictator and refuse to say that Vladimir Putin is a dictator, and to say that Ukraine caused this war and they shouldn't have started it, they should have just let Russia take what they wanted. I mean, he might not in the end give Russia everything they need, but certainly in the messaging, he's saying everything Russia would like an American president to say so far. And number three, I don't remember what my third point was. So, Judge, go ahead.
Well, we should all be gratified that the New York Post has stood firm in their position that Putin is the dictator.
Yeah.
Now, I also agree, Joe, with something that you said. I think that we all, and this is my, of course, personal opinion, we cannot keep reacting to everything that Donald Trump says. because things change in his world. Things change, let's be kind, day to day, his positions. And as far as Ukraine goes, what happened at the UN is there was no need to take that stance, even if you want to take the position that Trump is a very transactional guy and he wants to placate his buddy Putin. There was no need for that vote at the UN. And I do believe that the public at large supports Ukraine. The American public supports Ukraine, but they grow weary. We grow tired of the money that's being spent, and of course, the loss of life there. But the way to get a peace in Ukraine, and let me just I just thought of something I read this morning. I saw this morning, is that apparently Trump had said that there could be a European peacekeeping force in Ukraine. And Trump said that he had this discussion with Putin, and Putin was okay with it. And now today we hear that the Russian government is saying that that's not the case, that Putin never agreed to that. So now we have a very difficult decision to make. Who's the liar, Putin or Trump?
Both,
All right.
liar.
No, but this is why you can, and you made such a good point, Joe, about the fact that when a president spoke, you were supposed to some degree, take it to the bank. And that is not in any way the case with Trump. He is completely scattered. And it's if it wasn't so serious, it would actually be very funny. It'd be entertaining. But
Yeah.
he better look. If Trump thinks that he can get anywhere over the rest of his term, he better hope that there is a resolution, a fair to Ukraine resolution to that war. Because he promised, he already broke the promise because it was supposed to be over on day one. Okay? Day one of my administration, it was going to be over. So we'll see.
Ed, just one more piece to this. I mean, Joe, if this was transactional, which a lot of negotiations are, why would he give away a big chip and say that he wants Russia to be part of the G7? This country basically used its wealth to denigrate Ukraine for its own imperialistic designs. And why would we want to rebuild the Russian economy, which has been bankrupted by this war, to help our enemy? Plain and simple. It's just ridiculous. So I don't know if you did buy the art of the deal. It should be on the banned list.
Well, the way I look at it is this: Donald Trump was elected, and he won soundly both all the swing states, and he won the popular vote. So that now, in his case, and that is only the second time this happened in history, people knew what they were buying, and leopard doesn't change his spots. So people wanted him, despite having some centrist Republicans who were running, but he beat them all soundly. So one has to respect that in a democratic process, people chose someone whom they knew they cannot rely on what he says. So when people says, well, we want to take it seriously, what he says, people decided on someone who they knew is going to lie and say whatever comes to his mind. So they wanted him.
It's a
So,
realistic.
if I can just finish
Go ahead.
that point.
I'm sorry, Mike.
So people knew what they were getting, and that's what they got. Now, as far as these negotiations, I am looking more what's going to happen in the future. Is he going to give everything to Putin, which obviously would be wrong, or is he just using this as a negotiating strategy, and we just have to wait if indeed he can negotiate peace and what type of peace it's going to be. I think you do need to give Russia some incentive, because if you just keep saying we won't give you anything and everything is going to end up, we want Ukraine to quote unquote win, then Russia is not going to accept that. And what has to be pointed out that Russia is a nuclear power. So one has to, negotiate and come up with a situation. So in my opinion, I would say let's wait and see what happens and what type of deal, if any, they will be able to come to.
Well, I hate to be, your view on the American voting public, and I tried to look at this. Yes, we had a peaceful transfer of power, which we didn't have in 2020. And you take a very Hudson County, Jersey City view of things. Sometimes people deserve the government that they get.
Yeah.
It's kind of sad. But also, I hearken back to when you criticize the government, what Mark Twain said. It's the responsibility of all people to protest when they don't basically like what the government is doing. So hopefully, the minister of propaganda for the Trump regime won't basically shut that down. And it's sadly, I think a lot of the stuff that Trump says, it's like, look at this shiny object, while he dismantles things out of sight. And, he's got the best dismantler, and maybe it's a good idea to turn toward the economy. That's
I want to shift to that in just a moment, and I'll just share the wise words from the great philosophers at the writers for The Simpsons. If I can get this to work.
Bill Venezia. I've said it before and I'll say it again. Democracy simply doesn't work.
Said it before and I'll say it again. Democracy simply doesn't work. Although, what was it Churchill said? Democracy is the worst form of government there is, except for all the others.
Right.
But let's shift to another topic here. We're about a third of the way through our episode. And I want to talk about Elon Musk and DOGE and what's going on there. Because that's been creating a lot of backlash, at least among people that I see, who maybe were a little bit on board with Donald Trump, but some of the cuts and things, at least, again, from what I'm seeing on social media, take that what you will, but people not pleased with some of the things that are being done by Elon Musk and his group of, whatever you want to call them, at DOGE. So I don't know who wants to kick off talking about that, but I think we should move on because that's been a big topic in the news recently also.
Joe, you'd be surprised when I look at this. I think it's a worthwhile endeavor in terms of cutting back on the federal bureaucracy. I don't think there's anything wrong with that. But the tact is that you do it under the parameters of a democratic government, that you basically respect the rights of the courts to basically weigh in whether it's legal or not. And number two, I didn't elect Elon Musk. No one did. I mean, and I know he has security clearances for SpaceX, but it worries me that basically this guy wants to rule the world. And I don't think we voted to basically change a democracy into an oligarchy. I mean, I'm troubled by that. But I do think that it's a worthwhile endeavor to look at the fat and to cut it. I think the American people definitely wanted that in the election. They also wanted our economy to get better, which it hasn't. Inflation has increased. And it's kind of sad because Trump basically said that would be fixed too, but I guess that's on the back burner. What he also said—
Well, they fired a group of people who were in charge of monitoring bird flu the other day, so that'll solve the price.
He fired most of the people who do provide government oversight. You know, a lot of this stuff is being done under the cover of darkness, but what's being done is exactly what the Heritage Foundation 225 plan was about, which is sad. And now the Congress has passed a budget which is going to pave the way for what? A 217 continuance in the tax laws, which will benefit the top 5%, maybe, will benefit certainly Elon Musk. And I also want to say one other thing. I mean, Trump says a lot of stuff that's not rational, but to change, not to pay our debt on American treasuries is ridiculous. What the whole issue of not paying on treasuries is, you can't pick and choose. Trump, I guess, wants to run the government like he ran his businesses. When in doubt, declare bankruptcy. It doesn't work. And to change, I remember our esteemed colleague Daniel talking about the return to the gold standard. Trump has stated that he wants to basically have an economy based on Bitcoin. His Bitcoin and his wife's Bitcoin and his family's Bitcoins basically went to trade at 78 cents and now are trading at 14 cents. And by the way, most of them have gotten out to the tune of $100 million. That is the biggest grift of this administration thus far.
So,
yeah, there's 3.5 years more to come.
well, he's also going to go count all the gold bars at Fort Knox, he said the other day.
All he has to do is go to Menendez's closet.
Well, there was somebody on our podcast, I don't remember who said, Project 2025, that has nothing to do with Donald Trump. He doesn't know anything about it, which we heard from Donald Trump over and over again. He sure seems to be doing a lot of things that were in Project 2025 for his first month for somebody who didn't know anything about it. And his director of Office of Management and Budget was the co-author of Project 2025. So,
Well, my take on it is this. First of all, Elon Musk has not been elected, but Donald Trump appointed him to that position. And there is no question that the government needs to be trimmed down. I mean, right now, what's happening is that our revenues are $2 trillion less than what we spent. So essentially, we're spending about $6 trillion, and we are only bringing in $4 trillion. And the government is extremely fat, so it needs to be trimmed. So drastic measures have to be taken. So obviously, there are going to be some mistakes. However, it does have to be trimmed. And, the fact is, and I have it from my personal experience, having treated a lot of people who work for the government, many of which, I had a patient, for example, who was a manager at the Department of Labor. And he said that often people would just bring newspapers and read papers because they had nothing to do and they were still being paid. So what's interesting is when a private company lets people go, nobody seems to care about it. But when the government workers are supposed to be laid off, then it's a big problem. Why is that? There are no sacred cows. I mean, government should be running efficiently. Now, there is a quote from Thomas Jefferson, which I really like, and I'm just reading it so I don't mess it up. It says, government big enough to give you everything you want is big enough to take everything you have. So so from my point of view, the idea of cutting down expenses has to be a priority. And as far as the idea of taking away from the rich, so to speak, or taxing people very highly, that doesn't work because the rich people are the ones who actually provide investments and jobs. If it wasn't for people like Elon Musk, Jeff Bezos, our economy would be down the drain. And even people who are middle class, let's say teachers, nurses, and so on, if they look at the IRAs, that's sort of been going up because of the investments in those companies. So by taking away from people who have a lot of money, you are actually also taking away from the middle class.
Mike, if all of that would be true, if we move to, say, a VAT tax or a flat tax, where taxation would be fairer, I agree with you that government's too bloated and that there needs to be basically cutting back. I agree with you. I mean, Eddie and I come from Hudson County, where, we majored in duplication and non-service. It needs to take place. I just believe that it should be fair and balanced and that we should see it. Because if you look at the stock market, the last 3 weeks hasn't been too kind on what's going on. I mean, it doesn't. And truthfully, the saber
look,
curling
We
of
all agree that there has to be reductions in spending and more efficiency. But number one, on a human level, when you're talking about people and their jobs, you have to try to reduce that workforce in a fair, humane way. You don't tell people your job is finished as of that day. That doesn't happen in private industry. That doesn't happen anywhere. People get notice. People get severance. So that's one thing. But you know what? We can go on and on about cutting spending. And the fact of the matter is that the amount of money that's being spent on the federal employees is relatively small. I saw the percentage of the budget, and I don't remember the exact figure, but it's relatively small. And really, what you need is leadership with courage. Now, by rights, Donald Trump is in an enviable position because he's not going to be up for election. And what you have to do is look at those difficult issues like Social Security, like Medicaid, which is where the money is being spent. And nobody apparently has the courage. And when I say nobody, I mean nobody who's elected to office in Washington has the courage to even raise that issue as to potential solutions. So, you know, this situation though with Elon Musk is somewhat worrisome, to say the least. He really, even by Trump's standards, he really is some sort of egocentric maniac. You know, all this dancing around, holding a chainsaw like it's a big joke. It's not a joke. You know, you're talking about people's livelihoods and their families. It's not funny. And he's not funny. So I think there's going to be some substantial backlash against Elon Musk. It's only a question of the degree. But I think it has started. And if he continues to take the positions that he is, I think that this is going to come to a head.
Yeah, that's going to come sooner, not later. And it already.
I think you're right.
Who's leading that charge with the MAGA Republicans is Steve Bannon. Bannon hammers him on his podcasts and in his reports that have come out. I think that's his sworn vendetta to take him down. I mean, if things were a little bit with the general public, if they were more transparent in terms of what was going on, if it was done in a refined way with the theatrics aside, I even think Trump is a little put off by those theatrics because it takes the spotlight away from him. If one megalomaniac dealing with another, and two can't survive in that vacuum, ultimately. If you look at the approval ratings of the administration and what they're doing, they're down substantially. And they're also, now, I'll take what I've looked at from CNN and the Wall Street Journal. And don't forget who owns the Wall Street Journal, Bezos, who seems to have genuflected in the Trump. Trump's gone from 40% approval rating to 45, 53% disapproval. And that's going down even more, I guess, as the economy worsens. So it's going to be interesting to see. What we have in terms of that Venn diagram of we all come together, the federal government is too bloated and it needs to basically be cut back.
Yeah,
It's be done by the rule of law, and it should be done with transparency and oversight, and that's not happening.
and with some kind of logic. Right now, it just seems like, okay, I'm just going to slash things all over the place. It's a bull in the china shop situation. I mean, the other day, for something that matters to me, because I know a number of people who work for this particular part of the government, he laid off over 1,000 people who work for the National Park Service. The National Park Service is one of the very few parts of the government that most people agree they like around the United States. And he just willy-nilly fired over 1,000 people because they were on probationary status. It wasn't because they had poor job performance or anything else. It was just anybody who was on probationary status, meaning they hadn't completed a certain amount of time in their job, were laid off. And that's not saving the government billions of dollars. You add those 1,000 people together, you're probably talking about a few $100,000 in salary for one of the few parts of the government that most people generally agree is a good thing. America's best idea, as the national parks have been called by people in the past. But beyond that, they laid off the National Nuclear Safety Administration. They just slashed it. They just fired everybody. And then they realized a few hours later, oh, you know what? We probably should have the people who make sure that our nuclear arsenal is secure and make sure that we don't have nuclear meltdowns. And they rehired all of them. Don't you do any review before you lay off an entire department of the federal government? And then you have to look back and say, oh, you know what? Maybe we should have those people still in their jobs. Let's bring them back.
Go on. But I think, one thing that you guys are missing is that the previous government did absolutely nothing. So at least this government is doing something. We all agree, as the judge said, that the government is bloated. But under the Biden administration, they just kept increasing the size of government and nobody did anything. So at least now there is an effort to cut it down.
Is the government not paying members of DOGE?
And I agree that, it's not perfect, but they are trying to address those issues. And that's very important. Now, I agree with the judge 100% that 75% of the expenses are from Medicare, Medicaid, Social Security, and defense.
Yes.
And that's when right now he's basically going after the low-hanging fruit. And certainly, penny saved is a penny earned, that's for sure. But once he starts going after the Medicare, that's where the money is, then a lot of people are going to be unhappy, and it will take a master politician to kind of somehow tell the people, the electorate, that in order to save these programs, you have to trim them or you have to do something about it. There are certainly plenty of people, including some of us and including myself, who are getting Social Security and who potentially not need the Social Security. So, there are ways to do it, but whenever somebody suggested it, there was a commission called Simpson-Bowles Commission. I think it was under Obama. And that's exactly, they had a very rational...
A couple episodes ago.
Right. So, and that was a very rational way of doing it, but the politicians, because of people want the benefits, but they don't want to pay for these benefits, so that sort of went nowhere. So that's, to me, it's going to be interesting what's going to happen.
I know what you're saying, but listen to this. Right now, the retirement age has been pushed up for most places to 70 years old. It went for us as baby boomers, we maxed out at 66 years old. Actually, if you deferred it until you were 70, you got 8% a year more. Okay. What's the answer to Social Security? Is it to cut it completely, or is it to basically increase? Now, listen to this logic. If we increase the age of when we collect, all right, I hope that you and I and older people can basically put over those younger people or children so that they can basically have a decent retirement, which should be the birthright of every American. If the government's not going to pay for it, we better do well with our investments for what we leave behind, because I just don't see the American dream anymore being attainable by the average American. Whether that's home ownership or whether that's a secure retirement. Yeah, the Social Security needs to be revamped, but I think the only way to do it really is to increase the ages, maybe even cut back on some of the benefits, but that should be shared. completely opposed to.
Well,
And
increase
again-
the ages and also decrease the amount that some, for example, let's say a person who is, who is making whatever, or has a net worth of, let's say, $10 million, maybe should not be getting Social Security, even if he paid into it. So there has to
You
be,
sound like a socialist now.
well, but that's the only way to save it for people who really need it. That's what I'm saying.
Well,
I
again,
agree with you, Mike. And
I think
I'm talking the date and time of this.
I think it requires, again, as the judge was saying earlier, courageous and honest messaging. And what we're getting right now from somebody like Elon Musk is talk about, well, there's thousands and thousands of people who are 250 years old who are taking Social Security. And if we just root out that waste, it'll save the system and everything will be great for everybody. I mean, that's the messaging we're getting right now from Elon
Yo,
Musk.
you know that's utter bullshit too, because by the way, every funeral parlor, every funeral director is obligated by law to keep their license to report a death to the Social Security Administration. There aren't that many dead people on the rolls collecting Social Security. It's just not even possible.
Certainly not 250-year-olds who would have been dead before Social Security was even created. Just as a history teacher, I have to point that out. Math doesn't add up there. But when the program was created.
Well, there may be thousands of people on the rolls that, for whatever reason, weren't taken off. But the number of those dead people who are actually collecting checks is next to none. All right. And anytime you have that kind of fraud, it's prosecuted, and it's minimal. So that was something that was said and of course was thrown out there. But frankly, I'm happy to say that it really, after getting a little traction initially, that's kind of gone by the boards as well. And that goes back to what you were saying, Joe, about the fact that you can't even react to some of this stuff. It's just impossible. Okay, so it kind of dissipates on its own. And just to go back to Social Security, one thing that should be done, quite frankly, that I think is relatively easy, is that the early retirement age for Social Security should be raised. It's much too low, 62. It should be raised, and I don't think that's a heavy lift. If you were to say anybody who is under 50 years old or under 40 years old, whatever, you're not going to be able to collect early Social Security until 65. But nobody even brings it up. Nobody
Can we make it under 36 years old instead of under 40?
What if you do?
No, you don't want to retire. You don't want to collect at 62. You don't want to. You have to wait till you're 70, like Bill Venezia and I did.
But I think it also depends what type of work you do, because people who are like intellectuals, they can work until their brain goes. But if you are a manual worker, there are people who get sick and their back doesn't work anymore. So if you are a manual worker, I would argue, a lot of people need to retire earlier because their body cannot do it anymore.
I'm sure that can be factored into the equation, but I doubt very much that the leaders, our governmental leaders, would have the courage even to take that on. You know what I mean? By the way, Ed, I'm waiting for John Thune to stand up. John Thune, please stand up.
Yeah, we'll see. I still have faith if things really go sideways, Billy. I think you will.
I hope so.
Well, I want to come to that a little bit in these last few minutes that we have for the third topic I brought up at the beginning of the show, which is that the cabinet heads have pretty much all been confirmed now, right? A couple episodes ago, we were looking ahead to some of those votes were about to happen. We were speculating about, will RFK get through? Will Kash Patel get through? Will Tulsi Gabbard get through? And all of them got through. Robert Kennedy was the closest to being rejected, right? Was he the one that JD Vance had to break the tie for?
I think that was excellent.
That was Hegseth. That was Hegseth.
Hegseth,
Yeah.
yeah.
It was Hegseth that J.D. Vance had to break the tie for. He had Collins, Murkowski, and Mitch McConnell voted against him. Mitch McConnell also was the only Republican who voted against Tulsi Gabbard.
Too little too late.
Our Russian agent, who's now our director of national intelligence, the only Republican who voted against her being the head of national intelligence was Mitch McConnell.
But there is no evidence she's a Russian agent. I have to push back on that. It's just a rumor.
Looks like one.
Well, you know,
Walks like a duck and talks like a duck. It's Tulsi Gabbard as a Russian agent trying to be in a costume as a duck. And RFK, only Mitch McConnell, who had polio as a child, voted against our polio vaccine.
That's not true. He did not have polio. There's no proof of that, according to Trump.
Yeah.
All right.
Okay. But only one who voted against RFK was Mitch McConnell.
I mean, I have no problem with RFK because he's the only one who is actually addressing the issue of Americans being so sick. I mean, we are the most obese country out of all the countries, all the developed countries. Our obesity rate, if you take the obese people plus the overweight, it's 70%. So he's the only person that I know recently who is trying to address all these issues with food additives, the unhealthy lifestyle, the food advertising, the pharmaceutical industry. So I certainly don't agree with his vaccine position, but certainly a lot of positive things about him. So I think he should be given a chance to see if he can make our country healthier again, or at least if he can promote that idea, because nobody is promoting that. Everybody's eating out of a takeout window.
Michelle Obama tried. Look what happened.
Yeah, I mean, the stuff about food additives and all, okay, I agree. We obviously have an obesity problem and things like that in this country. But, you know, it's also, he's in charge of everything about vaccines, things like that. And it's very problematic, that aspect of his perspective on health issues.
I hate to say it, I find him the least enjoying. Like, he'll do the least damage to America of those other people who basically take those positions.
Hank Death troubles me more than RFK, honestly.
Yeah, well, Kash Patel troubles me because I think the wish hunts are going to basically be forthcoming, which basically, you know, fit with the whole Trump administration. Look at this shiny object. You know, let's go get the Biden crime family, or let's go get Dr. Fauci, or let's go get, you know, some of the other enemies of Donald Trump, his perceived enemies.
We haven't made the list yet, so I guess our podcast hasn't grown big enough yet.
No. It'll be coming. It'll
Yeah.
be.
Well, at least Patel stood up to the Musk inquirers when they wanted information about what the employees were doing on a weekly basis. And so, you know, that's an interesting dynamic too. But I know we don't want to go back. We don't want to really go back to the DOGE thing. But you know, some people have stood up, and for good reason, by the way. But,
Also, I think that all of these nominees, if they fail, I mean, they just started, right? So if any of these people who are now placed in the positions fail, they are going to be replaced. So, you know, I mean, if you have a democratic process, and if, let's say, Pete Hegseth starts drinking on the job or sexually harassing women at the Department of Defense, he's going to be gone. So, you know, there's a saying, proof is in the pudding. So if these people do a good job, fine. If they don't, they are going to be gone.
But RFK is going to take all our pudding away.
Pudding, homemade pudding with no additives.
Unless he uses raw milk. Yeah.
I want to see him set foot in the state of Texas, and if he doesn't have had his measles vaccine. Measles seems to be making a huge comeback. I mean,
New
it's
Mexico too.
New Mexico too. Same.
Yeah. Well, I mean, Unfortunately, we're at that time, listeners. You know the deal that we record this during my free period at school. It was a little bit of a chaotic morning this morning, so we even got a late start. But we have time here in these last 5 minutes to kind of go around. Everybody kind of reflect on the episode, give us your last thoughts, things for listeners to think about or look at in these next couple weeks until the next time we have a day 2 on our school schedule where we could record again, which I have to look at and see when that is. So, Doctor, do you want to go first?
Sure. Well, I am kind of relatively optimistic because I think in this administration or in this government, things are changing and there are certain things which are developing which were not happening in the last administration. So I don't know if it will end up poorly or well, but at least changes are coming. And I'm willing to give everybody a chance to prove themselves. And I, as a Democrat with a small d, I would say that, the healthy pudding will be the proof. So we will see what happens. And let's hope they succeed, because ultimately, if they do, all of us will profit. And if they don't, I do believe that something else will happen. There will be a backlash and, another system is going to be tried.
I'm going back to Thomas Wolfe. I hope for the best, but expect the worst. And I have there's no basically logic or evidence that it won't be anything but that. But hopefully some of these issues will bear some fruit with something positive. I just have no faith in Donald Trump at all, because we'll go back to what the esteemed doctor said. He's a malignant narcissist, and that's what runs his thought processes.
Well, that's true. And let's and all of us, I think, agree. And I think you used the word, Billy. You used the word grift. And Trump is a grifter, pure and simple. Always was, and it will continue. And that guides everything, apparently. That's his pole star, is grifting. And I think when the American public at large realizes that, I think many people do, but not the majority. I think his popularity is going to wane. Now, I am curious in the week or two ahead to see what happens with this dynamic between Elon Musk and the various agency or cabinet heads on this issue about their employees. Who's going? I guess it comes down to this: who's going to run their office? Are they going to run it, or is Musk going to run it? And I think that that's something that we all will keep an eye on and see who prevails.
I'm going to say, as my last little thoughts here, just a couple things, which is number one, leave the national parks alone. We all like national parks. They're America's greatest idea. The lands belong to the people, and we deserve to have good people working there who are working there and shouldn't be laid off just because they haven't been there very long. And number two, leave Ukraine alone. Slava Ukraine. And I hope for peace, but I don't want a peace that is at the destruction of which should be our friendly ally and at the benefit of our rival, Vladimir Putin. So, again, it'll probably be looking ahead a week or two from now before we can meet again and record another episode where I have this hour-long free period. Unfortunately, last week, my wife was not off from work. I was all week, so I had my son all week, and he is protesting his nap at this point. He's his terrible twos and isn't so fond of napping for a couple hours in the middle of the day anymore. So what could have been a recording window for us didn't materialize, but we'll look ahead to the schedule and we'll see you ago. Oh, as always, reach out to us with your thoughts. We love to hear from you. If you know any of us personally, of course, you can reach out to us, but you can also reach the show at Wigs for Wigs. That is WIGSFORWHIGS at gmail.com. Let us know your questions, your comments, your thoughts, and we'll see you again soon for another episode of Wigs for Wigs. Take care, everybody.